November 3rd, 1998.
It was a very important day for the president.
I think this election is a referendum on all the hopes of the American people for the future and their assessment of the present condition and how we get from here to a better tomorrow.
And it's shaping up to be a much better tomorrow for the president and for the Democrats than anyone expected. Tonight, vote 98.
From ABC News, this is Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Fasten your seatbelts. There's one more round of political spinning to go before we leave the 98 elections behind and begin turning down the sheets in motels all over Iowa and New Hampshire. The fact is that this could have been a perfectly terrible day for Bill Clinton, and it wasn't. Whether the American voting public thought of it this way or not, and most indications are they did not, they were casting ballots on the makeup of a potential jury in the matter of impeaching the president. If Republicans had gained a lot of ground in both the House and the Senate today, they would surely have taken that as a sign to press ahead forcefully on impeachment. Actually, it's been a surprisingly good day for Democrats, and if they now interpret the national results as a repudiation of the impeachment process, who's to blame them? In truth, most of the political races today appear to have been decided on issues having nothing whatsoever to do with sex, perjury, or scandals in general. But when you think about it, that too provides some insight into what the voters care and don't care about. We begin our coverage this evening where my old friend Peter Jennings left off a little more than half an hour ago, except that in the past 35 minutes, the polls have closed out on the West Coast, so there should be some fresh news. Peter, what's been happening in California and Washington?
Well, let me pick up where you left off at this moment, Ted, because it has indeed been a real election with real implications on a lot of levels. You've mentioned several of them. The most important projection in general that we can make at the moment is that ABC News projects an estimated seat gain in the House of Representatives of 5 to 7 seats for the Democrats. Now, the last time in a midterm election that a party holding the White House made such gains was in 1934. So that'll give you an early indication of how important a night this has been for the Democrats. Let's start with some Senate projections then. In California, ABC News now projects that Senator Barbara Boxer, seeking a second term, has held her seat and defeated the state treasurer Matt Fong. It was very much seen, this race, as a referendum on Barbara Boxer, who many considered too liberal to win another state election. She also had Clinton family connections, which didn't help her. In Washington, we project that the incumbent Senator Patty Murray, seeking a second term, has defeated the Republican Congressperson Linda Smith, the Republican. Murray elected in '92, Year of the Woman. This is the third time these two women have run against each other for a Senate seat. Big victory for the Democrats here in New York State. In fact, at this moment, the incumbent defeated Senator Alphonse D'Amato was making his concession speech on local television. Congressman Chuck Schumer, we project, the Democrat, wins and gains a seat for the Democrats here in New York. Similarly, in North Carolina, a gain for the Democrats. The young attorney, 45-year-old John Edwards, the Democrats defeating the incumbent Republican Senator Locke Faircloth. A very mean, very expensive race there, as it was here in New York. Now, what's making it a very interesting evening for all of us anyway is that several races are still too close to call, and that includes the Senate race in Illinois, the Senate race in Wisconsin between Russ Feingold and Mark Newman, the Senate race in Kentucky, where the incumbent Senator Wendell Ford is retiring. That's an open seat there. And the Senate race in Nevada, we believe, is now still too close to call, where the incumbent Senator Harry Reid is seeking a third term. Also tonight, some very interesting governor races, none more interesting than in California, where we now project that the Lieutenant Governor Gray Davis, the Democrat, has defeated Attorney General Dan Lundgren. Governor Pete Wilson, of course, his term limited. Enormous win with all sorts of ramifications, I'm sure, Ted, you will talk about, for the Democrats in the state of California. And several races, governor's races, still too close to call in Minnesota. Take a look at that top column there. where Jesse the Body Ventura, we should probably stop calling him that now because he's become a much more serious politician and a much more influential character in that race. That race is still too close to call between Norm Coleman, the Republican, Hubert Humphrey III, the Democrat, and Jesse Ventura. In Alabama, a Democratic gain where the incumbent governor, Fob James, who was seeking a third term, was defeated by the Lieutenant Governor, Don Siegelman. A lot of that having to do with gambling and the state lottery and whether or not that kind of money would go for education. Fob James, the incumbent governor, very much opposed, and it has cost him. In South Carolina, much the same issue. Incumbent Governor David Beasley, a conservative Christian opposing the lottery because it is gambling, defeated there by the former State House Minority Leader Jim Hodges, another gain for the Democrats. And in Georgia, just about as tough as it comes for Guy Milner. You see down there in the left-hand corner because we project that Roy Barnes, the Democrat, has defeated Guy Milner to hold the Democratic seat that was term limited for Governor Zell Miller, and that is the third time that Guy Milner has run and lost, and it has cost him a fortune. Ted.
Peter, almost too much to absorb at one time, so let's move over to our colleague Cokie Roberts, because even though you've got more races to talk about, Cokie, you're going to have to do it in more general terms. Seems almost unbelievable. About 6 weeks ago, folks were talking about the Republicans gaining perhaps as many as 35 seats in the House, and now ABC News is projecting, as Peter has said, a possible gain of 5 to 7 seats for the Democrats. What do you make of it?
Well, and as Peter said, it is historic. Take a look here, Ted, at what the normal off-year gains are for the party that is not in the White House. We've seen them over the years. From 1946 with Harry Truman, we have here, up through 1994 with Bill Clinton when he lost 52 seats. The Republicans took over the House for the first time in 40 years. And at that point, there was a truly anti-Clinton, anti-Democratic tide going on. No Republican incumbents lost that year. A whole lot of Democratic incumbents lost. That is completely turned around. There was certainly not that same feeling about incumbents and not that same feeling about Bill Clinton. Incumbents have by and large done well tonight, and the ones who have lost tend to be Republicans.
Is there any suggestion, Cokie, that this is a backlash to the Republican impeachment movement, or is it just that we have a collection here of dozens upon dozens upon dozens of local races, each of which seem to have turned out now in a surprising fashion to be for the Democrats?
Well, I think that, of course, it's local races. You're talking about House seats, and they are local, and there are all kinds of local issues involved. But you can't have an election like this in the middle of an impeachment proceeding and not say that it has some effect on the impeachment and that an impeachment had an effect on the election. And I think that it will certainly be interpreted as being a backlash. In the exit polls that we took, I think we found that 6 out of 10 people said that they disapproved of the way the Republicans were handling the impeachment. And you had only 5% of the people saying that the Clinton scandal was the biggest issue, the lowest issue on the totem pole. So clearly this will be interpreted by the Republicans when they return as a backlash against impeachment.
Now, our White House correspondent Sam Donaldson is with you. Sam, there must be jubilation at the White House tonight. I imagine you haven't had time to check over there, but tell me how you think this is going to be presented tomorrow morning.
Well, I think the president is absolutely jubilant. Let's look at the Senate. For the first time, the Republicans hope to pick up 5 more seats. They would have a filibuster-proof Senate. That's gone away. In fact, they could lose a seat or 2, depending on how these too close-to-call races turn out. Secondly, when it comes to the president, there were 2 Republican senators the Clintons wanted to defeat most of all. Alphonse D'Amato in New York, because of the Whitewater hearings of 3 or 4 years ago, Ted, very vituperative of Senator D'Amato toward the Clintons at that time. And Locke Faircloth of North Carolina. They believe that it was Locke Faircloth who helped engineer the appointment of Kenneth Starr. I mean, the name Kenneth Starr means something to you. Well, they saw that happen. And finally, as Cokie has suggested, the impeachment process is slowed, obviously, by the fact that not only was there no push for impeachment, but there are no more Republicans to be elected to add to an impeachment vote if it happens to have been a party line vote. So Mr. Clinton is clearly popping champagne, opening Arkansas branch water, whatever drink he wants tonight, and he must be smiling broadly.
Sam, Koki, Peter, thank you all very much. When we come back, we'll be joined by the former senior advisor to the president, Rahm Emanuel.
We're going to Gergen. Back up.
They are having a party at the White House tonight, and I'll figure out where the camera is in just a moment. The president and about 24 friends, staffers, and political supporters are celebrating tonight's victories. Until just a few minutes ago, I thought we were going to go to Rahm Emanuel, but we are in fact going to go to my old friend David Gergen, who once held a very similar position to that of Mr. Emanuel. We're having technical problems in terms of getting out to California at the moment, David, but put yourself in that role for a moment. Put yourself in that position for a moment. What do you make of today's events? Quite amazing, isn't it?
It's a thunderous victory for the Democrats, one that was totally unexpected, I think, not only by the White House, but certainly by the press corps and by the pollsters. The fact that the Democrats did as well as they did, I think, does suggest a backlash, and there's plenty of evidence, Ted, that the Democrats were helped in several states like New York and California by a surge of voting among women, among blacks, and among Hispanics. And that's going to be an important challenge for Republicans for the future and for both parties. Interestingly enough, the two Republican candidates for governor who did so well tonight in Texas and Florida, the two Bush brothers, both did well among women and among Hispanics. They reached out for those constituencies and did better. I think a lot of Republicans are going to read a message into that.
Now, what's going to happen tomorrow morning, do you think, David, in terms of impeachment plans? It seems to me that Republicans have a little bit of rethinking they may want to do.
It's going to be a terrible dilemma for the Republicans, Ted, because many of them want to press forward with impeachment. Their base certainly still feels strongly about Mr. Clinton. They're very anti-Clinton. They want to see some action taken in the House of Representatives, and yet the clear message from the voters who went to the polls today is that, put a fork into this impeachment. It's done. They don't want to proceed with it. So I think that the Republicans face a dilemma coming back here after these elections to try to figure out how to proceed. My bet is the House Judiciary Committee will do it fairly quickly, will vote out articles of impeachment, and that the House itself will end the process, will vote against impeachment, and find some kind of censure resolution quickly.
David, I'm told that we now have contact with California and with Rahm Emanuel. Rahm, can you hear me all right? Rahm? Well, you can hear me, but I can't hear you, and I'm not sure. Try talking for a moment, Rahm. Let's see if we can get... No, I'm afraid we don't. All right, let me pose a question to you, Rahm Emanuel, and maybe we will be able to hear your voice on the air when you give the answer. You have been anticipating, I assume, over the last few weeks while you were still at the White House, the worst. Now that the results seem to be coming in where there has been a net gain for Democrats in the House, not altogether clear yet what's going to happen in the Senate, how do you think that's going to change the impeachment picture?
Well, I think what you have now is a back-to-work election, and that this has defied history, and they have bucked the dollars. And I think what you have now is an election to basically get back to work. And then I think if they're going to look at the impeachment, I think they're going to look to the impeachment and realize that this election needs to be interpreted as one that says we need to get back to work. And I think that the Democrats will push very quickly for a vote in the House on a Patient's Bill of Rights, and I think the Republicans in the House will look to quickly on a vote on replacing their leadership. And I think that's what's going to happen here.
If someone can suggest to Mr. Emanuel that he put that little thing back in his ear again, then I can ask the next question.
I can hear you. It was just echoing.
Okay, terrific. And feel free to pull that thing out of your ear again when you start to talk. When you talk about replacing the leadership, we're going to have Dick Armey on in a moment. Who are you talking about? Dick Armey, Newt Gingrich?
Well, it's not for me to name names, but I do think that one of the things that's come out of here is that in this election, you have a clear case where the Democrats put an agenda in front of the American people on Patient's Bill of Rights, Social Security, education, the economy, and taxes. And the Republicans decided to make this election about impeachment. That strategy has been repudiated. In the budget, the president and the Democrats focused on education, the environment, and the Republicans buckled. And I think the Republican caucus will look at this and say, our leadership buckled in a budget contest with the president. They had a strategy for the elections that's now defied history, and we had in excess of $100 million over the Democrats. And I think the Republican caucus will look at this and say, somebody needs to pay a price. I think the Democrats stand united, and I think one of the vindications here is that this has really been a back-to-work election. And I think the American people said, we want our concerns, whether it's health care, whether it's education, whether it's Social Security, whether it's crime, whether it's gun control, we want our concerns met. And I think this is a big wake-up call to the National Republican Party, and they have a big division now in their party between the moderates as well as the extreme right. The extreme right wants the president. They want this impeachment to go forward. And I think if you look at Senator D'Amato and Senator Faircloth, who spent their political capital on scandal and went down, I think a lot in the Republican caucus will wonder if this is for the grace of God goes I. And I think they're going to take a step back, a deep breath, and say, we want to halt this right now.
This, if you can hear me now, this
I can hear you, Ted.
Good. This is a difficult way to conduct an interview, so I'll make this the.
I'm going to try this with my family. This works.
It does work. It actually shuts people up. I just want to pose one last question to you, based on part of what you said, and that is, it suggests that you think the Republican Party is going to be in some sort of disarray over the next couple of years. And of course, the end of a midterm election always signals the beginning of a presidential election. If indeed the conservative right is going to be pushing for more impeachment hearings, more investigation, and if the lesson to the rest of the Republican Party is that's not the way to win elections, doesn't that seem like a very divisive kind of thing to happen to the Republican Party?
Oh, there's no doubt that there's a division in the party. I mean, look, the National Republican Party was, for the last year, was a one-trick pony. They didn't have an agenda. They didn't have an agreement on what to do. And the far right in their party is only stronger in a presidential primary. Their voice only grows and increases. And I think they have a very big division in the Republican Party nationally, as well as around the country, about the course of action. And the Democrats stand united on a set of agenda that we marched off a year ago at the President's State of the Union on Social Security, on education, on health care, Patients' Bill of Rights, and on the environment.
Rahm, you have raised a couple of provocative issues. As I said, we have Dick Armey standing by. We're going to have to take a short break. I thank you very much for joining us this evening. We'll be back with Dick Armey, among others, in a moment.
MCI 5 Cent Sundays.
ABC, as some of you may know, is in the middle of a labor dispute right now, which does account for some of the technical difficulties we're having tonight. Remember how a moment or two ago I told you that Dick Armey would be joining us in a moment? Well, he may be, but joining us for sure from Salt Lake City at the moment is Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And joining us from Watertown, Massachusetts, Democratic Congressman Barney Frank, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. And if Congressman Armey joins us, I'm sure that these two gentlemen will be happy to welcome him into their midst. Senator Hatch, let me begin, if I may, with you. It has been, and there are indeed a few races that are still too close to call, but it has been, how shall I put it, a surprising evening?
Well, actually, I never believed that we were going to win 5 seats in the Senate. I do think we'll still win 1 or 2, which is about what I thought, and McConnell in our meetings said if we can win 3, it'd be great. In the House, if we do lose some seats to the Democrats, that is an astounding thing. And, you know, you have to congratulate the Democrats for running a good campaign. I have to say that, you know, all politics is local. I don't think the impeachment matter entered into it much at all. But the Democrats did run a good issue-oriented campaign, and I think the Republicans did not sell what we've done, the first balanced budget in 30 years, which would never have happened without a Republican Congress, welfare reform that is working relatively well around the country and getting people to work with some esteem, IRS reform. You just go right on down the line. It's been a pretty eventful Congress, but I don't think we got our message out there, apparently.
Senator Hatch, yours has been the voice of reason over these last few weeks when it comes to the issue of the impeachment inquiry and the possibility of finding some sort of a more moderate resolution. What do you think is going to start happening tomorrow morning in terms of where these hearings go from here on in? And I realize at the moment it's in the House, but yours is a voice that people listen to.
Well, it's too early to tell. You know, you've got to look at all of the facts, and you've got to look at all the evidence, and we're far from knowing all of the evidence in this matter, and who knows? I remember saying, you know, and it's honest, that in the Senate, I didn't know one senator who would vote for impeachment at this time with these facts that we currently know. But I did have one really great Democrat who I have a lot of regard for come up to me and say, Orrin, don't be too sure that no Democrats will vote for impeachment. But as of right now, with what we know, unless more comes out, I just don't think you'll get the two-thirds vote in the Senate. So I think the House needs to look at that as well, and we need to look at all the evidence, weigh it, and you know what it really comes down to is what is in the best interest of the American people. It may be impeachment, it may not be, and I think we've got to do what's right, regardless of what the polls say, regardless of what pundits say, regardless of what anybody says. It's a constitutional process that really we ought to give a chance to work, and I think members of the Republican Party have to look at this accurately and truthfully and do what really needs to be done.
Congressman Frank, what Senator Hatch says, of course, is one of the old truisms of politics. It is all local. Nevertheless, the landscape has changed a little bit tonight. How do you measure the impact of that change?
Oh, it clearly went beyond purely local things. The Republican Party, I think, clearly overplayed its hand, and I think what you saw today in much of the country was a public statement that they dislike the right-wing control that is becoming increasingly evident in the Republican Party. You're right that Senator Hatch has been the voice of reason. I must say that for partisan reasons, I suppose I should be glad that not many of his colleagues were listening to that voice, but for the country, we would have been better off. I think had, frankly, the Republicans gone more in the direction that Orrin Hatch went to, and that he was from time to time criticized for by some of his colleagues, there might have been a different result. I do believe there was a national element here. Look, we have the history that in the 6th year of a presidency, the party opposite the president almost always does very well. You then had Bill Clinton mess up. Let's not forget that. Bill Clinton behaved irresponsibly. He did some things that were an embarrassment that have been widely criticized. Given that, obviously, everyone expected the Republicans to do very, very well. And I think what happened was that they overplayed their hand in two ways. First of all, by politicizing the impeachment process, by putting all of that report out, by appearing to be, frankly, cheering Kenneth Starr on as he engaged in tactics that many Americans are very unhappy with. Secondly, they decided they could collapse the rest of the agenda. Some of the things Orrin Hatch mentioned were from the Congress before this one. They killed campaign finance reform. They killed any effort to deal with protecting the rights of people who have been mistreated by the health insurance industry. They cut back on the president's efforts to help education. I think what you saw today, an extraordinary historical result of a Democratic gain in the House and a virtual standoff in the Senate when the odds really favored the Republicans because of who was up. I think what you saw was a national statement that this right-wing takeover of the Republican Party that Orrin Hatch, to his credit, has been trying to resist, scares a lot of the voters.
Let me pose another question to Senator Hatch, having to do now with the future of the Republican Party. Are there any lessons to be learned from the way that the vote appears to be going today? Lessons, I mean, in terms of what seem to be some divisions within the Republican Party as to where to move next on the impeachment issue.
Well, our party always has a rougher time, you know, I think in elections, and in all honesty, this is the first time in 70 years that the Republican Congress, the House of Representatives, has been controlled by the Republicans for 3 straight terms. So that in and of itself is pretty significant. But it is a disappointment to me that we didn't gain seats in the House, or at least it doesn't look like it at the present time. I hope that the night's not over yet, but it does look kind of bad. But if I had a suggestion for our party, it is this, that we cannot ignore the fact that women dominate an awful lot of what needs to be done in our society. And sometimes I think we don't appeal to to women as much as we should, because sometimes we come off a little bit too hard rather than looking for those ways of finding ways of helping families and women and so forth. Secondly, I think the Republican Party's got to get off its dime and it's got to start waking up. I know that Republicans feel this way, but they don't do a good enough job, and that is we've got to go after the minority vote, the Hispanic, African American, Asian, and every other minority. We can't afford to ignore anybody.
Well, actually,
sometimes I think we do, and I think that's wrong.
You're making a point, Senator, that I just wanted to raise with you, because in fact the only two bright spots, perhaps, or the two of the brightest spots on the landscape for the Republicans tonight are the two Bush brothers, both of whom did. I mean, you know, young George Bush is talking about compassionate conservatism. He did extremely well with the Hispanic vote. He got about 21% of the black vote, and he did very well with the women's vote. And his brother Jeb in Florida did essentially the same thing. You see that then as a pattern for the Republican Party, is that right?
I do, and I'm actually thrilled for the Bush family. There are no two people I respect more than George and Barbara Bush, unless it's Ronald Ronald Reagan and his wife Nancy. I mean, those are four wonderful people, and to have these two sons win two of the biggest states governorships, and to do it by appealing across the board to everybody, women, minorities, Hispanics, African Americans. You know, that thrills me to death, and I think we've got to do more of that in the Republican Party. It isn't because we don't want to. I think some of our people don't know how. And we've been so used to being ignored by, for instance, African Americans, that some of our people don't try anymore, and that's ridiculous. I know a lot of good African Americans who are starting to say, hey, look, we're being ignored by the other party. Certainly Hispanic Americans are being ignored by Democrats. They take them for granted all the time, and it's time for us to wake up and realize we've got to appeal to everybody, or my gosh, we're not going to be the majority party much longer.
I now see, Barney Frank, if I may, Dick Armey has been sitting very patiently there.
In your program, you may do whatever you want.
Listen, you've never let me get away with that before, but if you'll do it tonight, I'm good.
Do I not get a chance to respond, though, to Senator Hatch?
I'll tell you what, I'll give you a chance to respond not only to Senator Hatch, but to Senator Hatch and Dick Armey. How's that? But first, Dick Armey.
I can't pass out.
But Dick Armey has to have a chance to talk first, and first of all, my apologies to you, Congressman, for keeping you waiting this long. Let me reward your patience by asking you right away what you're making of these, of the gossip mongering that is already going around saying they're after your head, that Dick Armey is in trouble.
Well, they're welcome to it if they're big enough to take it. Well, I'll just tell you that we have retained the majority in this Congress for a third successive Congress for the first time in 70 years. We're going to go back to work starting next week. We're going to cut taxes for the American people. We're going to improve education by making schools more accountable to the parents and under local control and authority. We will fix retirement security for all generations of Americans, and we'll repair the defense of this nation. We've got a lot of work to do. We will go back to work on that as we have been doing, and we're going to have a great many successes in this next Congress.
I realize that what we're talking about here is projections that are largely made by people like me and my colleagues, but there are also some politicians who were making projections as recently as 6 weeks ago that the Republicans might gain as many as 30 to 40 seats in the House, and now it appears that you will probably lose 5 to 7 seats.
Well, you know, there have been all kinds of projections out there. A couple of weeks ago, not too long ago, they were projecting that the Democrats were going to retake the House. You know, one of the things that I've learned a long time ago is that we got an awful lot of people that are better at speculating than they are at conducting campaigns and getting the job done. And the fact of the matter is, this is a tough business. It's been a tough year. It's an incumbents year in one respect. In the other respect, everything serious about life in America has been sort of drowned out with Monica Lewinsky, the president's malfeasance in office, his obstruction of justice, and all this spinning going on around there. It's been very difficult to get a serious message about serious public policy out in America today when the whole country's been really obsessing over the president's antics in the White House and all of his efforts to cover it up and all the efforts to make excuses for it.
Forgive me for
to psychoanalyze it and commit sociology over it. It's been a frustrating year for anybody that's had serious thoughts about policy like cutting taxes, repairing our nation.
Congressman Armey, I must tell you,
education in America.
Let me just jump in for a moment, because I must say I'm sort of astonished to hear you complaining about the fact that you haven't been able to get the country to focus on other issues when I suppose it could be argued that it was the Republican Party as much as, I mean, you know, the Democrats haven't been pushing the Monica Lewinsky affair, have they?
Well, no, wait a minute. We have a special counsel appointed by Janet Reno, or by a three-judge panel at the request of Janet Reno, in pursuit of what has now been the admission of the president that he lied under oath in a civil case where he's charged with sexual harassment.
All I'm saying is if you
wanted to have to deal with that kind of silliness.
All I'm saying is if you wanted to...
And I thank the Lord I never had to deal with that with my 4 boys. Why should I have to deal with it with a man in his 50s that's supposed to be in one of the most responsible offices in the world?
All I'm asking, Congressman Army,
want to be bothered with.
All I'm asking you is if Republicans wanted to go away and Democrats wanted to go away, I guess it's going to go away.
Well, you know, this is the problem you have. The fact of the matter is we are given constitutional obligations and duties. None of us get elected thinking we're going to have to spend our time on such as this. The president has brought this and laid it before the nation, and we are going to do our duty on it. Now, in the meantime, we also have serious legislation like cutting taxes, reforming education, making schools accountable to parents, fixing our nation's defense, and repairing retirement security for all our children. But we're not going to back away from our Constitution. There are going to be 435 members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, myself and Barney Frank, and we're all going to swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States, not to the polls and not to the president's spinmeisters. And we will do our duty, as unsavory as it is, as unwelcome as it is in our life, and as regrettable it is that the president has brought the nation to this point.
All right, Barney Frank, as I promised you, you got the last word. You got a chance to respond to Senator Hatch, Congressman Army, whichever you prefer, or both.
Well, I'll mostly respond to Senator Hatch because Congressman Army did an excellent job of debating himself. He couldn't decide, I think, whether he wanted to obsess about Bill Clinton or object to people obsessing about Bill Clinton. I would note that the reason a tax cut didn't get considered this year is that the Republican Congress couldn't pass one. The House passed one.
We passed
the Senate,
it in the
because
House,
I think
Barney.
they were somewhat put off by the excesses of the House, didn't even pass a bill. So you can't blame... Bill Clinton never vetoed a tax cut. The Republican Congress couldn't pass one. They botched up the appropriations process worse than it's ever been and killed other legislation. The problem here was that the role of the extreme right wing of the Republican Party has gotten so strong that it kept them from focusing on any of the things. Mr. Army says, well, we're going to do these things. Well, why haven't they done them? Mainly because the Republican Party has been unable to function as a governing party as the right wing has grown. The other thing I would just say is I wanted to take exception to Orrin Hatch's suggestion that the Democrats have somehow ignored or taken the Hispanics for granted, or that the African Americans have ignored the Republican Party. The Republican Party has, over the past 30 years, consistently opposed things originally like the Voting Rights Act, like affirmative action in its most reasonable form, the form Colin Powell was for. They have generally opposed efforts to deal with the problems of minorities. As far as the Hispanics are concerned, they were appalled most of all by the assault on legal immigrants. The Republican Party took office in 1995, and they decided they were all honorary Navajos, and were going to kick all these foreigners out of this country, and went to war on the immigrants. They have had to admit that most of those things they did were wrong. They have undid a lot of them. But having done them, having inflicted that harm on many immigrants, including many Hispanics, they're in no position to object when people vote against them in self-defense.
Congressman Frank, I've got to interrupt at this point. I have a little piece of news that I'd like to pass on to the rest of the country, and Senator Hatch, if you're still there, I'd like to get a very quick reaction from you to it. Russ Feingold has won in Wisconsin. As you know, Senator Feingold told his Democratic Party to keep their money. He made a what some would say was an extremely principled stand, being terribly upset about what's been happening on campaign financing in this country, and being one of the co-sponsors of the Campaign Finance Reform Act. What do you think this says in terms of the future of campaign finance reform?
Well, I think that, first of all, I congratulate Russ Feingold. He's on my Judiciary Committee. He's a very fine person. And it was a very tough race, but that's also a very liberal state. And I think that it's amazing to me that that our Republican didn't do better and win that race. But the fact of the matter is that if we took the McCain-Feingold bill, we might as well quit as Republicans altogether, because that bill is one-sided. It would allow the $100 to $500 million that's poured into Democratic coffers every year and through independent expenditure campaigns by the trade unions in Washington that we can't even match. We can't even begin to match, and nobody even knows that's in the process. You wouldn't do a thing about that. What we ought to have is real disclosure. Everybody have to live up to disclosing everything that they do, and if we had that, I think we'd have more honest politics throughout this country. But the McCain-Feingold bill, my gosh, I think any Republicans who vote for that, they might as well quit now.
All right, Senator Hatch, I thank you very much, as I do Congressman Armey and Congressman Barney Frank. Thanks very much for all of it. When we come back, I'll be talking to George Stephanopoulos and David Gergen.
Second.
Throughout this political season, we have turned to David Gergen, editor-at-large of U.S. News and World Report, and George Stephanopoulos, ABC News political analyst, and they are back with us again tonight. George, we haven't heard from you yet. It has been a truly remarkable night, but I have to ask you, what does this do to the Republican Party? Because clearly, the Republican right wing is still going to be pushing hard for impeachment. And other members of the Republican Party, as for example Senator Hatch suggested tonight, are going to be looking for a new modality. So what's it going to do to the party as a whole?
Well, Ted, what you're going to see is a series of civil wars, I believe, in the Republican Party. First off, there's a very good chance, because the Democrats picked up seats in the House tonight, that there will be a leadership challenge to either Speaker Gingrich or your guest tonight, Majority Leader Dick Armey. Civil war number one. Civil war number two is the one that you pointed out, the one over impeachment. Will the right wing continue to push for impeachment of the president, even though the country has clearly said we want it to stop? And civil war number three will be in the year 2000 presidential race between the conservatives and the more moderates, and I think that the hand of the moderates has been strengthened tonight. The big winners in the Republican Party tonight, George Pataki in New York, John Engler in Michigan, George Bush in Texas, Jeb Bush in Florida. We're all trying for more compassionate conservatism, more centrist, moderate conservatism, not the far right-wing agenda that really cost the Republican Party a lot tonight.
David, where do you think the Republicans go?
Well, I don't think it'll be a civil war, but it'll be a little more civilized than that. But there will be struggles to find new leadership and a fresh message. And I think that that's going to, while there'll be, I think, an attempt to unseat perhaps one of the leaders, and it could include Senator Lott as well before this is over. I think there will be an attempt. I think they may well fail to unseat that. But the big push is going to be to find someone who can unite the party again as Mr. Republican or Mrs. Republican. I think that a lot of attention now is going to turn to George W. Bush in Texas.
Well, Dick Armey, as you heard, was effectively saying, if anyone thinks they're big enough to take me, let them come and try.
He seemed to be pretty comfortable in his position tonight, and but I think that an awful lot of people, George, yes, it does strengthen the hand of the moderates, but there are going to be a lot of the more conservative types who will say our problem in this was that we caved in to President Clinton on the budget. We didn't fight him on the beaches. We didn't fight him at every step of the way. We didn't go for the tax cuts we should have. And so that part of the party will come surging forward too, saying that what the problem was we didn't have enough vinegar in the message.
Which is why I believe it'll be civil war. I agree with you, David.
Now, George, I can't let this evening end without posing to you the question of, it's not so much a question, it's an observation to which I'd like your reaction. The president. I mean, talk about luck, talk about never being prepared to give up. It is unbelievable.
And he never does. You know, he has a saying. He used to say that elections are his best friend. And I think his best friend ever tonight is the elections of 1998, because it has restored him. He is the first president in the 6th year of his term, will be, to pick up House seats since James Monroe in the 1820s. It is just astounding. No one could have predicted. No one in the White House, even the most optimistic people, predicted an outcome like this tonight. And you know, there was a scene in the White House tonight. The president spent the evening camped out in White House Chief of Staff John Podesta's office, hunched over that computer, pulling up the results one by one in loving fashion, and then calling the victors on the telephone. It's been an amazing night for the president. There's always a danger with President Clinton, though. When he gets good news, he tends to overplay it, to overreact. The danger for the White House right now is that they have a split with the Democrats in the House over what is the appropriate punishment for what even the president has said is his unforgivable behavior, even though the question of impeachment tonight is dead.
Ted, may I point to that?
Please.
I think the president's best friend tonight is his wife. This can well be called the Hillary election. At any moment or any point along the last 7 or 8 months, she could have pulled the plug on her husband. She never did that. And instead, she went out and rallied the party faithful. She went 4 times to New York to help Chuck Schumer. And I think she really mobilized people there. And she found the voice of the Democratic Party. She went out to California. She was the one who really helped to pick this party up and give it some life and some spirit. And I think she helped to pull out the women's vote. I think she helped to pull out the Hispanic vote and the black vote. Exactly what Senator Hatch was talking about tonight. The Republicans now have to recognize that the Democrats have done a very good job in this election at mobilizing women and blacks and Hispanics.
It has been, I think we can fairly say, a much more interesting election than we expected it to be. George Stephanopoulos, David Gergen, thank you both very much. The Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, will analyze tomorrow's election results tomorrow on Good Morning America. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
If you'd like a transcript or video cassette of this or any other edition of Nightline, please dial 1-800-CALL-ABC. Nightline is always on with abcnews.com, on the web or AOL.
Nightline has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source. ABC News, now always on.